As part of our Zero Day Con series, I'm delighted to have Manny Rivelo as my guest today. Manny is the Chief Executive of Forcepoint and the driving force behind the data security everywhere positioning. Prior to Forcepoint, Manny served as Chief Executive and President of F5, and Manny has also held senior roles with Cisco Systems as Senior Vice President. And while he certainly doesn't look it, Manny is a veteran of the industry for over 30 years. It must be all of that fresh Seattle air, Manny, and the hard hours you put in at the gym. So thank you for joining me today. From the outside looking in, Manny, it feels like Forcepoint as an organization are really starting to solidify their portfolio into a comprehensive data security platform. And we know that data is a complex challenge. So in your view, as a guy who's been around this industry for such a long time, what are the biggest challenges that organizations face in implementing data security everywhere, considering the evolving threat landscape and the complex IT environments?
It's a great question. First of all, Ronan, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the time and the audience. We've been in the data security business for a long time at Forcepoint, over 20 years, right? And you could go back to some of our pedigree coming out of data loss prevention, right? Which was basically the early days around regulated environments such as finance, healthcare, where they needed to protect a certain amount of data. The challenge has grown monumentally because over the last 5 years, with the advent of work from home, bring your own devices, the movement to SaaS applications or cloud applications, really just the world has changed monumentally for users. The data has just exploded, right? There's also been an explosion of data. Data is sort of like, if you talk to some of the analysts, they'll say it's the new economy, right? It's the new fuel, it's the new oxygen. So organizations are relying on data. It's everywhere at this point in time, and the users are everywhere. So the challenges that we see is that most users don't even understand, or enterprises, where their data is. What type of data do they have? Who has it? Where it's located? What's critical data? What's non-critical data? Do they have redundant data? The list goes on and on. So some of it is just as simple as understanding what is my data, right? That's a challenge for organizations. And if you don't understand what your data is, it gets hard to protect. What do you protect, right? Where do you put boundaries around what should be governed and what shouldn't be governed, right? What is truly IP? What's PII? What's PHI? You get the gist of it. The second thing organizations are struggling with is ownership of data. Who owns it in an organization, right? How do I get my hands around what department owns the data? Companies know they must protect the data, but there's so much data in a corporation that has to be somewhat delegated also, right? To potentially functions inside the business. Marketing data should be governed by marketing. Finance should be governed by finance, and the list goes on and on. So it's a very large problem to solve. The good news is integration and workflow and automation and things like AI, enabling organizations, right, to get in front of it. And there's a new set or a crop of technologies that are coming out that are enabling to do that. So what started out 20 years ago as DLP, that's only one little sliver, right, of what data security everywhere needs to be, or a data protection program needs to be for an organization.
Great. So Manny, let me ask you, we're finding that a lot of organizations are starting from the with multiple different technologies, multiple different dashboards. In your view, how can organizations balance the need for robust data security everywhere while maintaining a user experience and productivity?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. It's part of, you start to see it in the analyst community as a discussion point around data becoming a business blocker, right? Or data security becoming a business blocker, because as I said, if it's the oxygen, if it's the fuel of an organization, but it's not protected and not curated correctly, it could become a huge risk. So it could slow down innovation, productivity, things of that nature. And there's no question, companies have to come around because they will face serious consequences as it pertains to things like reputational damage, regulatory fines, the list goes on. And you're seeing that happen throughout the world in different countries at a different pace, right, through regulation that's out there. So companies have no choice but to get in front of this problem and not impact user experience. The good news is, as I pointed out, tools like data security programs that have AI at the core can help, and workflow at the core can help. So you can actually be able to implement this data security environment and enable the AI tools to get you to go through the information that need to go through, right? Because there's petabytes of data that's out there to actually classify, discover, classify, right? Risk assess your data, doing all that through AI engines and doing it through workflow so you could remediate these challenges as you go. So you can maintain a data security program, and you can do that and create a decent user experience, but without using modern technologies such as AI, it will become almost nearly impossible.
I mean, when we talk about I mean, everybody seems to be talking now about posture management. So we hear organizations talking about cloud posture management, about SaaS posture management. You guys are becoming leaders in data security posture management. Can you talk about the role that plays in enhancing the overall data security for an organization?
Yeah, the concept of DSPM, or data security posture management, is synonymous, if you will, with cloud security posture management, et cetera. It is simply the concept of, can I discover my data, structured, unstructured, on-prem, off-prem, on an endpoint potentially, right? In the cloud, you name it. Can I discover that data? And trust me, there is so much data out there that the average organization has. So can I discover it intelligently, right? Can I classify that data through tools, things like AI, that allow me to classify that data and put it into buckets as critical data potentially, or highly confidential data? That could be IP, that could be PII data, that could be HIPAA, GDPR, a bunch of regulations around that. How do I place that and classify that data? Then how do I prioritize it? What's the data that I should look at first, right? How do I risk assess my data? I'll give you a simple example of risk assessing a data. I have a confidential file. I'm allowed to have that file, but by accident, I put it in my Google or in my Office 365 public folder. Now, everybody in my corporation has access to that data if they want it. That is a violation. That's a risk associated with that. How do I monitor that? So if there's movement of data and things of that nature, I could see that. And then how do I prevent the data loss prevention of that data over time? So DSPM is about, first of all, understanding your data, where it is, what's the posture, the risk associated with that. And then over time, attaching it to other technologies, which will allow you to remediate that and or block it going forward. So it's the beginning. Without you understanding your data, it is impossible for you to have a zero trust architecture. Like, what are you protecting, right? You're going to allow users, you don't even know where the data is. Where are they allowed to go? Where are they allowed to access? Things of that nature. So it's becoming, center of the conversation, because that truly is what every single hacker in the world is going after. They're going after your data. And if you don't know where it is, that's a huge risk.
So Manny, when we think about the anatomy of a ransomware attack now, right, the problem of the encryption is almost secondary. It's more now about the data exfiltration. So the people click on the link, they have their credentials harvested, they escalate privileges, they get on the wire, they find the unprotected data in the soft underbelly of the network. They extract that data, and then they use that as the leverage to extort their victims, right? And the organization falls victim to the regulatory powers. They fall victim to brand damage. And in order to deal with that right now, we see organizations implementing lots of different tools, UBA tools, zero trust architecture, identity access tools, EDR, XDR, SOC SIM. And most organizations have a commitment at some level where their spend on specific technologies is locked in for 3 years, 5 years, whatever it might be. But nonetheless, these breaches continue to happen and they continue to accelerate at pace. So I guess my question is this. I'm an organization working in healthcare. I can see that ransomware attacks and data exfiltration is accelerating in that specific vertical. And I go and I talk to one of your people about implementing DSPM. How does DSPM play with the rest of the technology sprawl I have within my environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's a piece of it. I'll talk about it specifically how we envision it at Forcepoint. We have a strategy called Data Security Everywhere, which basically it starts with the DSPM. There's no question that understanding your data, classifying your data, risk assessing your data, monitoring your data, movement, and all of that of your data on an ongoing basis. But once you've done that and you could establish then policy around your data, for example, this piece of data, Ronan, you're allowed to have, and you're allowed to do these things with it. That could mean I could have it on my laptop. That could mean I could print it potentially. That could mean I could move it to a drive in the public cloud. But it may also mean that no, you're not allowed to put it on a USB stick, right? It could also mean you're not allowed to send it over a web channel or an email channel, as an example. So what we are doing as a company is we're attaching data and the understanding of your data and the posture of your data and where you want your data to go, and then linking it with technologies on SSE, such as a CASB or a DLP or a SWIG or an email to prevent you from moving potentially that data across those channels. So, but if you don't understand where your data is, and you don't understand what
Yeah.
you have, it's almost impossible to define the policy, right, associated with that. So you're seeing these technologies continue to come together, and data is a big deciding factor where you want your data to be and where it should be, and then where you're allowing users to be productive, but where you constrain capabilities of what they could do. Because remember, at the end of the day, if I have to manage my enterprise data, I am accountable for that. I am the corporation that'll end up in the newspaper. I am the corporation that'll get sued by the regulatory bodies, right? And have huge fines to pay. I need my employees to be productive, but around certain data, there will be limitations of what you could do. And today, to be perfectly honest, that's become harder and harder because the data has just exploded everywhere. And I'll bring up one data point that, Ronan, I know you and I have spoken about this, which I think is a huge potential exfiltration capability for people. We all have sensitive data. I mean, if you think about it, maybe not everybody in a corporation, but a lot of people, because we take pieces of information that reside in these data repositories that we consider to be critical, and then we use it and we use artifacts of that data, sometimes summarized in Excel documents or PowerPoint documents, right? That then reside on our laptops so we could present at a board meeting or we could present at a QBR or a company update or anything of that nature. So if you think about it, when you think about just your endpoint and the amount of data you have, you may not have the full data store on your endpoint, but there's confidential information. And how many documents do we have that at the bottom say confidential and they're sitting there, right? And we don't even understand what services potentially that user is using, shadow IT services where they could move their data, right? So the two things need to come together. I need to discover what's on my endpoint, and then I need to be able to prevent potentially from it leaving that endpoint over time.
Yeah, no, I think you make a great point. I mean, when you look at the dark data, or the shadow data, you really have three areas. You've got the endpoint asset, which I would argue is probably the biggest risk to any enterprise because people simply don't know what data is on that. You've got the network, and then you've got your SaaS and your databases. So, I mean, it really is a challenging scenario. Manny, I mentioned this at the start, but looking at you've been in this industry a long time and you're pivoting the Forcepoint capability from being predominantly at the security reactive layer to now combining it to a data security message everywhere, which seems to me to be incredibly logical and effective, given the fact that, as you said, that regulators are looking at data, enterprises are looking at data, and hackers are looking at data. It's all about the data. So in your view, why will Forcepoint become the ultimate leader in this space?
Yeah, look, we've been at it, like I said, 20 years. I consider us to be there today. We're recognized by Gartners, Forresters, IDCs, and many other firms of the world as a data security leader. We've earned our stripes, I think, from the data protection space, but the business data loss prevention, data protection space, but the business has grown significantly from that. So what we are doing is we are backing up all the way to the DSPM era of discover your data, classify your data, risk assess your data, do all those kinds of things. We're also looking at things like detection and response, correction of that data, right? So if there's something that is data that's misaligned, right? And you want to either workflow that to maybe an integration to something like ServiceNow that fires off a ticket so somebody in IT could clean that data up, right? Or maybe you want to do it automatically and the tool itself could do that automatically. This concept of DDR, data remediation, if you will, to the concept of data lineage. Data lineage is a quite interesting concept. It's the concept of maybe an exfiltration happened of some kind, and I want to understand where did that file get exfiltrated, and then where did it get sourced? So think about almost like a family tree. The file that got lost by Manny because he sent it out via email came from Ronan. I renamed the file, right? I made an edit to it. How do I chase the tree of that to make sure that I go back to the source? Because I may have to protect it at the source, right? From that data perspective. And then tying that to all of the channels, as I said, right? To think about tying that all through automated policy. So now I can't put it on Box or on OneDrive, or I can't send it out email. So how do we take all of that, right, and integrate it by starting out, where's my data? And then it's a vicious cycle because it has to repeat itself. Remember how much data gets created daily by our organization, how much data gets moved. So once I assess where my data is and discover it, I got to monitor it, right? And I got to continually do updates on that data. But if I could integrate all of that through AI and workflow, right, I make the job very, very easy for an IT organization. Back to your first question, how do I create data security, right? Or with appropriate user experience, it's got to all come together. So how do we blend all those technologies together? And then how do we do it all through AI and workflow?
Fabulous answer. Manny, will you share with me? We're coming towards the end, but I'd like you to share with me your perspectives on AI. I have 1,000 folks coming to Dublin tomorrow from all over the world, and I know right now that the two words that will be used the most tomorrow will be artificial intelligence. I guess, firstly, what's your view on where AI is going, and why is AI fundamental in the data security challenge?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think you could do it, Ronan, without it, to be perfectly honest. I think the days of you trying to manually classify and tag your data are over because the data we're just creating that much data, right? There's just that much out there. Organizations have petabytes and some have much more than that. So where AI helps is AI will help you get through all of that, right? With these large language models that can be very precise and tuned and user tuned to actually classify the data the way you want to classify the data, right? Versus what you're going to have an army of people maybe in your organization trying to classify every single one of your files or asking every employee to classify.
Manny, let me ask you a question on that point because I think it's important. One of the biggest pushbacks we're seeing globally towards AI is the concept of this black box. It's where you don't have observability, transparency, trust, and explainability. So there's this black box and my data goes in there and God knows what comes out the other side. Um, So when you talk about the customization of AI and the transparency of AI, can you elaborate a bit more on that? Because I do think that that is fundamental for organizations to truly embrace AI, especially with their crown jewels, which is their data.
Yeah, look, not all AI is created equal, right? So there's probably bad AI models that are out there also, but if you're doing it correctly, you will get greater fidelity. There's no question about that on what you're searching for. And the models are tunable, so it doesn't mean that if you're seeing something that's a little bit out of whack, if you tell it, no, I need more of this and less of that, the model tunes toward that, right? So it does take a
Okay.
little bit of time to get your models to be perfectly what you want to do. But we're talking about hours here or days versus years trying to classify your data. And if you try to classify your
Yeah.
data manually, by the time you're done, it's already changed. So you need things that are
Yes.
doing it at the speed that can't be comprehended by a human being. The other thing AI gives you is once you tune the model, it's going to be the same all over your enterprise. It's not how I classify data. My interpretation of classified data may be different than yours, right? When we look at what a company may want. So although I can manually classify a document, my interpretation may be different. I may misclassify a doc, or I may misclassify a doc intentionally because from an insider threat perspective, I don't want that document to be blocked on one of the channels going out. So AI is fundamental because it is basically your army of highly tuned individuals in an organization to classify every single one of your documents, structured and unstructured. And I'm talking about everywhere, on-prem and off-prem, right? Across all your different technologies. And if you tie that together then with the concept of, for example, if we're sitting in your network, we know everywhere you go because we have technology. Think about a CASB, think about a SWIG that tells us every website you go. So we can then also tell you where all your shadow data may be, right? That you may not know. Because if I ask a typical enterprise says, oh, well, we're using Salesforce, we're using OneDrive, we're using this, maybe an S3 bucket, right? And then, yeah, but what's every employee using, right? Because every employee may have their own service. They may have Box, they may have something else. So we could tie that also together, and then AI can go out there and search those repositories. So without AI, I think it's impossible to solve this challenge. And then not all AI is created equal. So you have to make sure that you go with a vendor that has really, really deep strength in their AI models and that they're tunable by the average human being in an enterprise.
So Manny, if I could summarize my takeaway from this conversation, as you said, Forcepoint have earned your stripes over many years in the data protection realm, and you guys have built a very comprehensive portfolio of security tooling. The repositioning of Forcepoint under your leadership to bring the data everywhere, foundational layer in my view, it allows organizations to maximize the investment in their security tooling upstream. It allows them to, in my view, to demonstrate a higher return on investment from that tooling. And I guess ultimately, all of that tooling at the end of the day is implemented in order to mitigate risk. And that risk is associated with data, and therefore, if you don't understand that data, then you're caught in a vicious cycle. And you guys are approaching it from a data first perspective. Understand that data, risk assess that data, use AI at scale to contextualize that data, and then ensure whether that's either the Forcepoint stack sitting upstream or some other technology that is being empowered to do the risk mitigation that's required. Is that a
That's
summary you
correct.
would agree with?
That's correct. If you look back, we talk about, it's perfectly said. We talk about a data first SASE framework that we go to market. So it's everything that people talk about SASE, but it's SASE understanding your data first, and then what channels do you want to protect? Well, how do you want to protect all of that associated with that? When we talk about data security everywhere, that is simply a series of go-to-market motions bundles, for lack of a better word, packages to allow you to go on your data first SASE journey, right? And get to the place of exactly what you said, which is understanding my data, mitigating the risk associated with that, and then monitoring and protecting it, right? From exfiltration, all that. So that's exactly how we look at the market. It is data and data first. And then from that, make the right level of policy on what you're allowing that data to do, so your employees can be highly productive, right, without disrupting it, but at the same time, protecting your enterprise, protecting your IP and everything else that you have to protect in a world where what everybody wants, not only the hackers, your competitors, if they could have it, is your data, right? Because that's how you differentiate
Indeed.
yourself. So if you don't take data into the forefront of your thought, you're really missing out on the oxygen of your business. That's as simply as we look at it and how we try to talk to customers. And I think the industry, Ronan, is driving that even faster because governments across the nations around the world are realizing that that is the competitive advantage. And you're seeing just the regulation come up
Indeed.
all over the world. So it'll be a bigger piece of the conversation. And I think maybe that will help us get in front of the hacker community over time when we govern our data a lot better than we are today.
Manny, that was incredibly insightful. I appreciate your time. I look forward to sharing this video with our delegates who are in Dublin tomorrow. And thank you so much. And I'm really excited to follow the data security everywhere journey of Forcepoint over the coming months and years.
Thank you, Ronan, and thank you for everything. Appreciate the partnership.
Thanks, Manny.